It was one of those nights when the wind carried whispers through the trees, and the sky looked like a dark ocean ready to swallow the earth. A single mother named Laura walked along the narrow road that led through the woods, her worn-out sneakers crunching on gravel. Her shift at the diner had just ended, and her back ached from hours of serving customers who barely looked her way. But what truly weighed her down wasn't the work. It was life itself. Bills stacked on the counter, a landlord waiting for rent, and an 8-year-old boy at home who still believed she could fix everything. Laura's car had broken down months ago, so she walked the 2 miles from the diner to her small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest every night. It wasn't safe, but she couldn't afford fear anymore. She had grown used to the sounds, owls calling, leaves rustling, distant dogs barking. But that night the forest sounded different. The air felt heavy. The silence between the wind gusts was deeper than usual, almost expectant. Halfway down the road she stopped. Somewhere beyond the trees, faint and broken, came a sound she couldn't quite name. It wasn't the cry of an animal. It was something human, soft, strained, desperate. At first she thought she was imagining it. Maybe it was just the wind. But then she heard it again, a voice trembling in the darkness. "Help, please." Her heart jumped. She turned slowly, peering into the black shapes of trees pressing against one another. The voice came again, weaker this time. "Help me." Someone. Laura's first instinct was to walk faster, maybe even run. It was late and she had her son waiting for her at home. But something stopped her. That small, familiar voice inside that always spoke louder than fear. The one that reminded her how she would want someone to help if it were her or her boy out there. She took a deep breath and stepped off the road. The forest floor was soft with wet leaves. Her phone's flashlight barely pierced the dark, but it was enough to see where she was stepping. The voice came again, this time from deeper inside. "Please, I can't move." Her pulse raced. "Hello?" She called out, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" No answer, just the sound of branches shifting. She moved closer, her flashlight flickering over tree trunks and tangled roots until the beam landed on something that made her gasp. A hand. A man's hand, pale and shaking, reaching out from under a pile of branches and dirt. For a second she froze. Then she dropped to her knees. "Oh my God. Sir, can you hear me?" The man moved his fingers weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't!" "Let them find me." Laura's heart pounded harder. "It's okay, I'm here," she said softly. "You're safe now." She started pulling away the branches and leaves covering him. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with mud, and his lips looked pale and dry. He seemed to have been there for hours, maybe longer. When she tried to lift him, he winced in pain. "Stay still," she said. "You're hurt. I'm going to call for help." But as soon as she took out her phone, the man grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "No. No police, please." His eyes, though tired, were full of fear, not just pain, but the kind of fear that comes from being hunted. Laura hesitated. Everything inside her screamed that she should call someone, but the look in his eyes made her stop. She didn't know who he was or what he'd done, but something about his voice, the way it cracked with exhaustion, made her believe he wasn't lying. "All right," she whispered, "but I need to get you out of here." She found a long branch nearby and used it for leverage to move the heavier debris. The man groaned as she helped him sit up. His clothes looked expensive under the dirt, not what she expected to find on someone buried in the woods. When he tried to stand, he stumbled, and she caught him by the arm. "Easy," she said. "Lean on me." They moved slowly, step by step, through the forest. He was tall but weak, almost collapsing twice. Every few minutes he murmured something under his breath, words Laura couldn't understand. Something about betrayal, something about someone trying to kill him. She tried not to ask too many questions. Right now, all that mattered was getting him somewhere warm and safe. After what felt like an hour, the faint light of her cabin appeared through the trees. It was small, old, and far from perfect, but at that moment it looked like salvation. She pushed open the door, helped him inside, and guided him to the couch near the fireplace. Her son Ethan was asleep in his room. Laura moved quietly, not wanting to wake him. She fetched a blanket, a bowl of warm water, and a towel. As she cleaned the man's face, she saw he was older than she first thought, maybe in his 50s, with sharp features hidden beneath bruises and dirt. There was something familiar about his face, but she couldn't place it. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice weak. "You shouldn't have helped me." Laura frowned. Why would you say that? He looked at her for a long time before closing his eyes. Because they'll come for me. She didn't know what that meant, but she chose not to ask yet. Instead, she covered him with a blanket and sat across the room, trying to calm her racing mind. Who was he? Why was he in the woods? And who was they? The night stretched long. The wind rattled the windows, and every creak made Laura's heart skip. She checked on the man again. He was breathing steadily now, asleep. She looked at his hands, soft, uncalloused, not the hands of a laborer or a wanderer. On his wrist was a watch, gold and fine, though scratched and muddy. She could tell it was worth more than anything she owned. She sat back in her chair, the firelight dancing across her tired face. Maybe she had made a mistake bringing him here. Maybe he was dangerous. But when she remembered the fear in his voice, she couldn't regret it. No one deserved to be left to die in the cold. Morning came slowly. The forest outside was silver with mist. Laura made coffee and checked on the man again. His fever had risen. She dampened a cloth and placed it on his forehead. When his eyes opened, he looked around the room, confused at first, then relieved. You saved me, he said. I found you, Laura replied simply. Now you just need to rest. He nodded weakly. I'll leave as soon as I can walk. Don't be ridiculous, she said, half smiling. You can't even stand. He gave a small, tired laugh, the kind that sounded more like a sigh. You don't understand. If they find out I'm alive, it won't end well. Laura folded her arms. Then maybe you should tell me who they are. He looked at her for a moment as if deciding whether to trust her. Then he said, People I thought were my friends. That was all he said. Laura didn't press further. She could tell there was a story behind those words, something dark and complicated. But she also saw something else in his eyes. Regret. Maybe even shame. Ethan woke up later and peeked into the living room. Mom, who's that? He asked sleepily. Laura smiled softly. A man who got lost in the woods. He's hurt, so we're helping him get better. Ethan nodded, curious but polite. Okay, does he want some breakfast? Laura couldn't help but smile. Even when they had little, her boy always offered what they had. By afternoon, the man had regained some strength. He told her his name was Henry. He didn't share much more, only that he had been traveling and something went wrong. Laura didn't believe the traveling part, but she didn't push him. Sometimes people tell half-truths when they're not ready to trust. She went outside to hang the laundry, and for a moment she felt the peace of routine. But when she looked up toward the road, she noticed something strange. Tire marks, fresh ones, deep in the mud. That was odd. No one ever came down this way. She went back inside, trying not to show her worry. Henry was awake, staring into the fireplace. When she told him about the tracks, his expression changed immediately. His hands gripped the blanket tightly. They found me, he whispered. Laura frowned. Who? What are you talking about? Henry tried to stand but stumbled. You need to take your son and leave. His fear was real, so real it sent chills down her spine. Slow down, she said. No one's out there. But when she peeked through the curtain, she thought she saw something move in the distance and a glint of metal, maybe the reflection of a car window. She turned back to Henry. Who are you really? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with tired eyes. Someone who trusted the wrong people. Someone who has something they want. Before she could ask more, he whispered again. The same words he'd said the night before. Don't let them find me. Laura didn't know what danger she had stepped into. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't turn her back now. The man had shown up in her life like a storm, and though she didn't understand why, something told her that this night, this moment, would change everything. She didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made her nerves jump. The branches tapping against the window, the distant hum of a car, the whispering wind. All of it felt like a warning. Henry lay weakly on the couch, his breathing uneven. In the dim light, he looked fragile, but his face carried a story written in invisible ink, one that was far from over. Laura watched the fire burn lower and whispered to herself, What have I gotten us into? Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of movement. A car door shutting somewhere down the road and then silence. Laura looked toward the woods again. Whatever had started in those trees was far from finished. And deep down she knew it. The next morning, the air outside was cold and heavy with mist. The forest around the small cabin looked peaceful, but Laura could feel something strange in the stillness. It was too quiet. Even the birds hadn't started singing yet. She stood at the window with her cup of coffee, watching the road that led into the woods. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted to the same spot where she had seen the faint glint of metal the night before. There was nothing there now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been close, too close. Behind her, Henry was still sleeping on the couch. His breathing was softer and his face looked less pale. The fever had finally gone down after she stayed up most of the night, wiping his forehead with cool water. He had whispered in his sleep, words she couldn't quite make out. Something about money, a contract, and betrayal. She tried not to think too deeply about it. Whatever his story was, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear it yet. Ethan came out of his room, rubbing his eyes and dragging his blanket behind him. "Mom," he said sleepily, "is the man still here?" "Yes, honey," Laura said, turning to smile at him. "He's resting. Let's keep our voices down, okay?" Ethan nodded, curious. "Is he going to be okay?" "I think so," she said softly. "He just needs a little more time." Ethan peeked toward the couch and whispered, "He looks like someone from TV." Laura chuckled. "Maybe. Now go wash up and I'll make breakfast." The morning went on quietly. Laura made eggs and toast, the simplest meal she could afford. Henry woke up around mid-morning. He sat up slowly, still weak but more alert. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough. "Morning," she replied. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, looking around the small room. "You really didn't have to do all this for me." "I couldn't just leave you there," Laura said, setting a cup of tea on the table beside him. "You'd have frozen to death." Henry looked down for a long moment before saying, "You're a good person. There aren't many left like you." Laura smiled faintly but didn't answer. Compliments didn't mean much when the world had already tested your kindness too many times. She took a seat near the window again, her eyes still flicking toward the road. Henry noticed. "You're worried," he said. "About what you said last night," Laura replied. "About someone coming for you." Henry sighed. "I shouldn't have said that. I was half delirious. I didn't mean to frighten you." "Maybe," she said, still watching the fog outside. "But something tells me you weren't just dreaming." He looked at her then, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Finally, he said quietly, "You're right." Laura turned to face him fully. "Then tell me who you are." He hesitated. "If I tell you, you'll wish you hadn't found me." "I already found you," she said. "So tell me." Henry took a deep breath and leaned back on the couch. His eyes drifted toward the fire as he spoke. "My name is Henry Collins. I used to own a company, and a large one. Construction, real estate, investments, things that make people rich and greedy." Laura listened quietly. "About a month ago," he continued, "I found out that my partners, people I trusted, were stealing from me. When I confronted them, they panicked. They didn't just want me out of the company. They wanted me gone completely. There was an accident. At least that's what it was supposed to look like. But I escaped. Barely. They think I'm dead." Laura stared at him. "So you've been hiding?" "Yes," Henry said. "In different places. But somehow they keep finding me. I thought I could lose them in these woods, but I wasn't as strong as I used to be. I fell. I must have hit my head and passed out. The next thing I remember is your voice." Laura felt her chest tighten. "And now? You think they're still looking for you?" He nodded slowly. "If those tire marks you saw are fresh, then yes. They'll search until they're sure I'm gone." Laura leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She wanted to believe this man, but it sounded like something out of a movie. Still, there was something in his eyes. Something too sincere to be a lie. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I don't know," Henry admitted. "But I can't stay here long. I don't want to bring you or your son into this." Laura crossed her arms. "You're not going anywhere until you can walk properly. And besides, I've handled worse than a few men with bad intentions." He smiled faintly. "You're braver than you realize." The day passed quietly after that. Laura did her chores and Henry tried to eat a little soup. Ethan spent most of the afternoon drawing pictures in his notebook. Occasionally, he'd glance at Henry curiously, as if trying to figure out who he really was. By evening, Laura started to relax a little. Maybe the tire tracks didn't mean anything after all. Maybe she had just been imagining things. She even caught herself humming softly while washing dishes, but as the sun began to set, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Laura froze. Her eyes darted toward Henry, who immediately tensed up. The knock came again. Slower this time, heavier. She whispered, "Stay here," and walked to the door. Through the small window, she saw a man in a brown jacket standing on the porch. He looked like a traveler, tall and rough-looking with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Laura cracked the door open slightly. "Can I help you?" "Evening, ma'am," the man said. "Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for someone. Got lost a few miles back. You haven't seen a man around here, have you? Older fellow, dark coat, about my height?" Laura's heartbeat quickened. She forced a calm smile. "No, I haven't seen anyone. Just me and my boy here." The man's eyes scanned the cabin behind her. "You sure about that? Word is someone saw a car near here a few nights ago. Thought maybe a stranger was around." Laura shook her head. "No cars come this way. You must have heard wrong." The man nodded slowly, still watching her face. Then, without warning, he smiled again. A softer one this time. "Well, all right then. Sorry to trouble you. You have a good night, ma'am." He turned and walked toward the trees. Laura waited until she couldn't hear his footsteps anymore before she shut the door and locked it. When she turned around, Henry was standing by the couch, pale and breathing hard. "That was one of them," he said quietly. "You're sure? I'd recognize that voice anywhere." Laura's hands trembled slightly as she closed the curtains.
"He said he was lost. They always say that," Henry replied.
"They're checking. They don't know if I'm still alive, but they're close." Laura sat down, trying to steady her thoughts. "What do we do now?" Henry looked at her, guilt shadowing his face. "You've already done too much. I should leave." "You're in no shape to go anywhere," she said firmly. "And I won't let anyone hurt my son. If they come back, we'll deal with it together." Henry stared at her for a long time. "Why are you helping me?" "Because if I were in your place," she said softly, "I'd hope someone would do the same." For the first time since she'd met him, Henry's eyes softened. He nodded slowly, as if her words had reached something inside him that had been closed for a long time. That night, neither of them slept much. Laura kept a small flashlight beside her and stayed awake listening. The forest outside was restless. Branches snapping, owls calling, the wind whispering through the trees. Once she thought she saw headlights flash through the fog, but they disappeared as quickly as they came. When dawn finally arrived, the light was pale and uncertain. Henry sat near the fire, lost in thought. Laura poured him a cup of tea. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing me." "I didn't say I believed everything," she replied with a faint smile. "But I do believe you're in trouble." "That's enough for now." Henry gave a small nod. "When this is over, I'll find a way to make it right. You have my word." "I don't need your money," Laura said. "It's not about money," he said softly. "It's about gratitude." Before Laura could reply, Ethan came running from his room holding a small envelope. "Mom, this was in the mailbox," he said, handing it to her. Laura frowned. Hardly anyone ever sent her mail. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, blank except for a single line written in neat handwriting. "You shouldn't have brought him home." Her blood ran cold. Henry's face went pale as he read it over her shoulder. "They know," he whispered. Laura looked at him, fear and determination mixing in her eyes. "Then we need to be ready." She didn't know what was coming, but something deep inside told her their lives were about to change even more than she had imagined. Outside, the fog lifted slowly, revealing a car parked far down the road, black, silent, waiting. Laura closed the curtain and looked at Henry. "Whatever this is," she said, "we'll face it together." Henry nodded. "You've already done more than anyone ever has for me. I won't let them hurt you." For the first time, there was strength in his voice, not fear and determination. Laura sat beside him, staring into the fire. The crackle of the flames filled the silence between them. Neither of them spoke, but both knew the truth. The quiet days were over. Something bigger had started now, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the forest seemed quieter than usual. The mist clung to the trees like a thin curtain, and the sunlight barely filtered through. Laura moved carefully around the cabin, making breakfast and cleaning up quietly. She could feel Henry's eyes on her from the couch, but he didn't speak. He was thinking, no doubt, about the envelope in the black car he had seen the day before. Ethan appeared, still rubbing his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "are they coming back?" Laura paused, her hand on the kettle. "I don't know, sweetheart. But we'll be careful, okay? Nothing is going to happen to us here." Ethan nodded, though his small hands clutched the edge of the table like he wanted more reassurance than she could give. Laura felt a pang in her chest. Protecting him had always been her top priority, but now with Henry in their lives, danger seemed to stretch closer than ever. Henry tried to sit up straighter that morning. His injuries were healing, but his movements were stiff, and every step seemed to remind him of how vulnerable he had been. Laura handed him a cup of tea and he sipped it slowly. "I can't stay here forever," he said finally. "I know you're helping me, but sooner or later they'll realize I'm here. They'll come back and I don't want to put you or your son at risk." Laura placed her hand on his. "Then we figure out a plan, together. You're not leaving alone." Henry looked at her, a mix of gratitude and guilt in his eyes. "You're too kind for this world. And you're too stubborn to see it," she replied. There was a small laugh between them, a quiet relief in the middle of fear. But the relief was brief. That afternoon, Henry insisted on sitting near the window, staring at the forest like he could see something others couldn't. Laura tried not to worry, but she felt the tension building. Hours later, a knock came at the door, gentle but deliberate. Laura froze. Henry's head snapped toward the door, his body rigid. "They're testing us," he whispered. Laura swallowed hard and approached the door slowly. Through the small window, she could see a man standing there. He wasn't the same one from before, but he carried the same cold presence. Laura didn't open the door. Instead, she moved quietly to a side window to see more clearly. The man looked around as if searching for something. When he didn't see anyone, he walked a few steps back, pulled out a small notebook, and jotted something down before leaving. He lingered for a moment, then disappeared into the trees. Laura closed the curtain and turned to Henry. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly. "They're watching," he said. "I know," Laura replied. "And we're ready." They spent the rest of the day planning. Henry explained what he knew about the people after him. They weren't ordinary criminals. They were careful, experienced, and patient. They had resources, connections, and money. They expected him to be weak and alone, but they hadn't counted on Laura. Laura listened, her mind racing. She had never dealt with danger like this before. Her life had been about work, bills, and raising her son, but now she realized she had strength she didn't know existed. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why are you trusting me with all this?" Henry looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because you're honest, brave, and kind. You risked everything to help me when you didn't have to. That's rare. That's why I trust you." Laura didn't know what to say. She only nodded. That evening, she taught Ethan how to be cautious without scaring him. They practiced checking windows, keeping doors locked, and paying attention to unusual sounds outside. It was strange to see her son learning about danger, but Laura realized it was necessary. As night fell, Henry and Laura sat near the fireplace talking quietly. He told her stories about his life before the accident, about the company he had built, the friends he had trusted, and the mistakes he had made. Laura listened carefully, realizing that the man who had been buried in the woods was more than just a victim. He had been someone who had built his world on trust only to see it crumble. When he paused, Laura asked, "Do you regret it? All of it?" Henry sighed. "Regret doesn't help. I can't change the past. But I can try to fix the future, and starting with not letting them hurt you or your son." Laura felt a chill, not from fear but from understanding. The danger was real, but so was the connection growing between them. They were two people from completely different worlds, brought together by a single moment in the woods. Late that night, Laura heard a faint sound outside, footsteps in the mud. She didn't panic immediately, but her instincts told her something was wrong. She gently shook Henry awake. "They're close," she whispered. Henry nodded. "I can hear them too. Stay calm." Laura grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the window. A pair of figures moved slowly near the edge of the forest, scanning the area. They didn't approach the cabin yet, but it was clear they were searching. Laura turned back to Henry. "What do we do?" He thought for a moment. "We wait, don't make a sound. They'll leave if they think the place is empty. We need to be patient." Hours passed. The figures moved, stopped, and disappeared into the darkness. Laura stayed by the window the entire time, her heart pounding. She realized how much courage she had gained, how much fear she had learned to control, and she also realized something else. She couldn't imagine letting Henry face this alone. By the next morning, the forest seemed calmer again. Henry moved a little more confidently, walking around the cabin without as much support. Laura felt relief, but she knew it was temporary. "Do you think they'll come back?" Ethan asked later, his voice small. "They might," Laura said honestly, "but we'll be ready." Henry watched Laura with a quiet intensity. "You've done more than anyone could ask," he said. "You've saved me once already." Laura shook her head. "No, we saved each other. Don't forget that." Henry smiled faintly, a real smile this time. "Maybe you're right." Over the next few days, Laura and Henry worked on practical things. They reinforced the doors and windows, kept supplies ready, and stayed alert. But they also shared moments of quiet humanity. Henry helped Ethan with his homework, and Ethan shared stories about school and friends. Laura cooked meals that they could all enjoy together, laughing softly at the little mistakes Henry made while stirring soup. It was strange and almost normal, and that made it even more precious. One afternoon, as they sat outside watching the forest, Henry spoke quietly. "I need to tell you something important, something I haven't told anyone else." Laura looked at him, her heart quickening. "What is it?" Henry took a deep breath. "I have a will, a legal document. It names who will inherit my assets, my company, everything I own. If I don't survive this, someone you've never met could take everything I've built, but I want you to have a part of it. You've done more for me than anyone else ever has." Laura felt her breath catch. She had never imagined something like this. Wealth, security, a chance to change her life. And yet she couldn't stop thinking about the danger still outside. "I don't want your money," she said firmly. "I just want you to be safe." "That's enough for me." Henry shook his head. "You don't understand. I can't repay you fully, but I can make sure your life and your son's life are better if I survive." "You deserve that." Laura nodded slowly, not fully trusting the idea but realizing how much it mattered to him. That night, Henry whispered something she would never forget. "You're the only one I can trust. You saved me once. I need you to help me survive again." Laura's heart tightened. She didn't feel fear anymore. She felt resolve. No matter what happened, she wouldn't let him face this alone. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying with it a promise of more challenges to come. But inside the cabin, for the first time, they felt a strange kind of peace, a quiet connection that went beyond fear, danger, or money. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The next few days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Laura kept a careful routine, making sure everything in the cabin was in order. Supplies were checked, doors were locked, and windows reinforced with extra latches. She had never imagined she would spend her days preparing for danger, but she had learned to adapt. Henry stayed close to the cabin, his strength improving slowly, but there was a constant tension in his eyes, a reminder that they were not yet safe. Ethan continued his quiet routines, though he sometimes peeked out the window, curious about the forest beyond. He didn't ask about the people after Henry anymore. Laura didn't want him to worry, but she knew he had already seen enough to understand that life could be complicated, dangerous, and unfair. Still, he smiled often, drew his pictures, and clung to the little normal things they had. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Henry grew restless. He moved to the edge of the porch, looking out over the road that disappeared into the forest. Laura joined him, carrying a lantern to light the small path back to the cabin. "They'll come soon," Henry said quietly. "I can feel it. They've been patient, waiting for the right moment." Laura nodded.
"Then we make sure they don't catch us off guard." He turned to look at her.
"I can't believe you're doing this. You're putting yourself and your son in danger just by being here." Laura shrugged. "We've already survived so much. I'm not going to let fear control us now." Henry studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her resolve. "You've changed me," he admitted finally. "I've trusted very few people in my life, and I've been wrong more times than I can count. But you make me feel like maybe there's still good in this world." Laura felt her chest tighten. She didn't know what to say. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of changing another person's life. But hearing it from him made her realize that courage and kindness had power beyond simple survival. Later that night, Laura heard faint footsteps in the mud outside. She froze, recognizing the rhythm, the careful pacing of someone surveying the cabin. Her heart pounded, but she stayed calm. She gently shook Henry awake. "They're back," she whispered. Henry nodded, rising slowly. "Stay close to Ethan," he said. "We'll handle this." Laura carried Ethan to the back of the cabin where a small hidden room was built years ago for storage. It wasn't much, but it was safe. She locked the door behind them and listened as Henry moved toward the front. The shadows of two figures appeared outside, moving cautiously. They didn't speak at first, only scanning the cabin. Henry had anticipated this, staying quiet and blending with the darkness near the porch. Laura could barely breathe as she strained to hear. One of the figures knocked gently on the door, a polite gesture that hid something much more dangerous. "We know you're in there," a voice called softly. "Come out and this will be easy." Henry's voice came from just inside the front window. Calm, steady, confident. "I'm not going anywhere. You need to leave." There was a pause. The figures whispered to each other. Then one stepped back and made a motion. Suddenly, a light flashed across the front of the cabin, too bright to ignore. Laura pressed herself against the wall with Ethan, her heart racing. The figures didn't advance further. They retreated slightly, and for a moment everything was quiet again. Laura realized Henry had somehow intimidated them without revealing his position fully. She felt a surge of pride for him and a strange relief. Henry returned to the back room after a while, breathing heavily but smiling faintly. "They'll try again," he said. "But we're ready." Laura looked at him, trying to measure her fear. "We need a plan. If they come back, we can't just wait anymore." Henry nodded. "I've thought about it. There's a safe place not far from here. A friend I trust. If we move there, we can stay ahead for a while. It won't be easy, but it's safer than staying put." Laura thought of the risks. Traveling through the forest, carrying supplies, and protecting Ethan, it sounded dangerous, almost impossible. But she also knew staying meant waiting for the next attack. She nodded. "We move at first light." The night passed slowly. Laura stayed awake with Ethan, who had finally fallen asleep, clutching a small stuffed animal. She watched Henry as he prepared supplies quietly. Every movement precise, careful. He wasn't just a man in danger. He was a man used to planning, thinking several steps ahead. By the time dawn arrived, they were ready. Henry carried a backpack with food, water, and documents. Laura packed a small bag for herself and Ethan. She felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Whatever lay ahead, they were moving together. The forest was alive with the sounds of morning. Birds called to each other, and the dew sparkled on leaves. Laura felt a moment of calm, even as the knowledge of danger lingered. They slipped quietly through the trees, following a path Henry had memorized. Hours passed. The forest grew thicker, and Laura realized how strong Henry had become in such a short time. He moved with purpose, guiding them safely over roots, through mud, and across small streams. Ethan followed closely, trusting his mother and Henry completely. As they walked, Henry began to share more about his life. He spoke of mistakes he had made, of the trust he had misplaced, and the lessons he had learned. Laura listened quietly, realizing that this man, buried and left for dead, was now relying on her as much as she relied on him. They stopped for a short rest near a small clearing. Henry unpacked some water and food. Laura watched Ethan eat quietly while Henry and she talked in low voices. "You know," Henry said, "if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. That night in the woods. You saved my life." Laura shook her head. "We saved each other. Don't forget that. I wouldn't leave you alone." Henry smiled faintly, though it was tinged with weariness. "I never imagined I'd trust someone like this again. I've been alone for so long, and now, I don't want to be." Laura felt a warmth in her chest. They had both found something in each other. Courage, trust, and an unspoken bond that grew stronger with every step they took together. By late afternoon, they reached a small, hidden cabin deep in the woods. It was simple but secure. Henry had told Laura about this place long ago, but had never stayed there in fear of being tracked. Now it seemed like the perfect refuge. They settled inside, securing the doors and windows once again. Henry checked every corner, then finally turned to Laura. "We should be safe here for now. I've been careful and they won't find us quickly." Laura exhaled, feeling some relief for the first time in days. "Thank goodness. I needed this," Henry nodded. "We've done well so far, but we can't let our guard down." Laura looked at him and smiled. "I'm not scared anymore. Not when we're together." Henry's eyes softened. You're braver than anyone I've ever known." Night came and they sat near the fire. Henry pulled out a folder of papers from his backpack. "These are things I've kept hidden," he said. "Important documents, legal papers, and a will. If anything happens to me, they'll need to be protected. I trust you to keep them safe." Laura took the folder carefully. "I will. I promise." Henry paused for a moment, then whispered, "I've never trusted anyone like this. You've changed everything for me. I can't explain it, but you've given me hope again." Laura felt her eyes water. She had never expected to hear words like that, from a man she had found buried in the woods, relying on her for survival. "I'm not leaving you alone," she said softly. "We face this together. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying an uncertain future. But inside, for the first time, they felt a fragile sense of peace. They had escaped immediate danger, but the journey wasn't over. As they sat quietly, listening to the forest at night, both of them knew that whatever challenges awaited, they had each other, and that was something stronger than fear. The bond between them, born in the woods and tested by danger, had grown unbreakable, and deep down, they both understood the reckoning would come, but when it did, they would be ready. The morning sunlight broke through the trees, painting the hidden cabin in a soft golden light. Laura woke early as always and moved quietly around the small kitchen. Ethan was still asleep, curled up in the corner with his blanket wrapped around him. Laura poured some water into a cup for herself and took a deep breath. She felt the weight of the past days pressing on her, the fear, the uncertainty, the endless moments of waiting. But she also felt something stronger now, determination. They had come so far, and she wasn't about to let anything stop them now. Henry was already awake, sitting near the fire with the folder of documents in his hands. He looked calmer than he had in days, but there was a quiet tension around him, a vigilance that never left. He had spent the night reviewing papers, organizing important files, and planning for the future. The will, legal documents, and bank information were all packed safely in a small satchel, ready for whatever might come next. Laura approached him quietly. "How did you sleep?" she asked softly. Henry looked up and gave a small smile. "Better than I thought I would. I think we've turned a corner. But we have to be careful. They won't give up so easily." Laura nodded. "I know, and we're ready." They spent the morning preparing to leave the cabin. Though it had been a safe refuge, it wasn't a permanent home. Henry had friends in other places who could help them, and the longer they stayed in one spot, the greater the risk. Laura packed supplies carefully, making sure Ethan had everything he might need. She glanced at her son and smiled, feeling a surge of protectiveness and love. He had been brave even in his small, quiet way, and she wanted to shield him from anything that might harm him. Henry adjusted his backpack, checking the strap again. "Once we leave, we have to move quickly but quietly," he said. "No one can see us and no one can follow. We have to stay ahead." Laura took a deep breath. "Then let's go." They set out through the forest, Henry leading the way and Laura following close behind with Ethan's small hand in hers. The forest was alive with morning sounds. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the soft hum of insects. It felt almost normal, but Laura knew better. Danger could be lurking in any shadow, around any bend in the path. Hours passed as they carefully made their way through the woods. Henry moved confidently, guiding them over fallen branches and across small streams. Laura could see how strong he had become since the night she found him. He was still cautious, still wary, but there was a steadiness in his steps that gave her hope. Around midday, they reached a small clearing where Henry paused. "We need to rest," he said. "We're close to my friend's cabin. From there, we'll be safe for a while." Laura nodded. "Let's sit for a moment." They shared a quiet meal of bread, cheese, and fruit from their supplies. Ethan sat close to his mother, listening as Henry spoke softly, explaining things in a way that was easy for the boy to understand. For a brief moment, the fear and tension faded, replaced by something warmer. The simple comfort of food, companionship, and the knowledge that they were together. After a short rest, they continued. The forest thickened, but Henry knew the paths well. He led them through hidden trails, avoiding the main roads, moving as silently as possible. Laura's heart pounded with every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, but she trusted Henry. He had saved himself before, and now he was guiding them both. By late afternoon, they reached a small river. Henry stopped and looked around. We have to cross carefully. The current is stronger than it looks. Laura took Ethan's hand. Stay close, she said. Hold my hand tight. They crossed slowly, one by one. The water was cold and the rocks were slippery, but they made it safely to the other side. Henry helped Laura with Ethan, steadying him and ensuring he didn't slip. It was a tense moment, but when they reached solid ground, a sense of relief washed over them. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they arrived at a small, secluded cabin that Henry had trusted for years. It was modest but secure, hidden behind tall trees and a natural slope that made it nearly invisible from the road. This is it, Henry said softly. We'll stay here for a while. No one can find us here quickly, and we'll have time to plan the next steps. Laura exhaled, feeling the tension of the past days begin to lift, just a little. She smiled at Henry. We made it. Henry smiled back, though his eyes were thoughtful. Yes, we did. But it's not over yet. We still need to make sure they can't find me, and that everything I've worked for is protected. Laura nodded. We'll handle it together. No one will get you, and no one will hurt Ethan or me. That night they sat by the fireplace, the small cabin filled with a quiet warmth. Henry opened the folder of documents again, reviewing them carefully. Laura watched him, feeling a mix of admiration and trust. This man, who had been helpless and buried in the woods just days ago, was now planning, thinking, and acting with a calm precision. Ethan fell asleep quietly in the corner, exhausted from the long day. Laura stayed awake for a while, sitting near Henry, listening to the crackle of the fire. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged through shared fear, courage, and trust. She realized that the man in front of her wasn't just someone who needed help. He had become a part of their small family. Days passed in the new cabin, each one bringing a small measure of relief. They ventured outside only when necessary, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. Henry began contacting trusted friends, arranging for legal protection and safety measures. Laura continued caring for Ethan, teaching him small lessons about courage and awareness, but also letting him enjoy the rare moments of peace they could have. One afternoon, as they sat outside the cabin, Henry spoke quietly. Laura, I want you to know something. I have assets, money, things I've worked for all my life. If I didn't make it, you and Ethan would have been part of my life's legacy. You saved me, and I want to repay that in a way that matters. Laura shook her head. I don't need your money. I just want you to be safe, he smiled gently. It's not just about money. It's about security, about making sure you and your son can live without fear. That's what matters to me now. Laura felt a lump in her throat. She had never imagined that helping someone could change her life so profoundly. It wasn't about wealth or possessions. It was about trust, kindness, and shared courage. As evening fell, Henry stood and stretched, glancing at the forest. We've survived so much already. There's still work to do, but we're stronger now. Together we can face anything. Laura nodded, placing a hand on his arm. We'll face it together, always. Weeks went by. The danger never completely disappeared, but it grew more distant. Henry's trusted friends helped secure his assets and make legal arrangements. The people who had hunted him were no longer a threat, either outmaneuvered or facing consequences for their actions. Laura, Henry, and Ethan began to find a rhythm. Simple, safe routines that allowed them to feel normal again, at least in small ways. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Henry turned to Laura. You've changed my life. You saved me when I had nothing, and now, I don't know how to thank you. Laura smiled softly. You don't have to thank me. We saved each other. That's enough. Henry shook his head gently. No, it's more than enough. You've given me hope, trust, and the courage to move forward. You and Ethan, you're my family now, even if it's not in the traditional sense. Laura felt tears prick her eyes. She had never expected to find something like this. A bond born of fear, courage, and shared experience. It wasn't about money or power or status. It was about life, trust, and the simple act of helping someone when they needed it most. Henry knelt down beside Ethan, who had been playing quietly. Ethan, he said softly, you're a brave boy. Your mom is amazing, and I'm lucky to have met both of you. Ethan looked up, smiling shyly. Thanks. Laura watched them, feeling a warmth she had never known. The danger was behind them, the threats resolved, and the small cabin in the forest had become a place of safety and new beginnings. Later that night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Laura and Henry sat by the fire, quiet and reflective. Henry looked at her and whispered, "You saved my life, Laura, but more than that. You reminded me what it means to live, to trust, to hope again." Laura took a deep breath, looking into the firelight. "And you reminded me that courage isn't just about fighting danger. It's about believing in people, even when the world seems impossible." They sat in silence, letting the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the forest surround them. The days ahead would hold challenges, but they had each other. And that, they knew, was enough. The forest outside was still peaceful and protective. Inside, in the small cabin, two lives that had collided in fear, danger, and hope were now intertwined forever. And for the first time in a long while, both of them could breathe freely, knowing that they had survived together.